I worked hard for that PhD.
Recorded live.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for tuning in. This is the November 15th edition, 2013, of the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. And our special guest is Dr. Jarita Holbrook. She's coming to us from Cape Town, South Africa. And not only is she coming to us from there, but this is the one-year anniversary of this show, and she is reprising her original appearance, which was 1 year ago well, I don't know if it was exactly today, but 1 year ago she was on the first, what we would call the successful show. And welcome, Doctor. How are you?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
And it's like 4 a.m. where you are?
That's right. It's still dark.
I don't know if we deserve, that kind of dedication, but thank you for being here. Again, it's always great to talk to you. I mean, we've conversed, read each other's stuff, and I'm very happy to have you here today. If we can start out, let's do this. Let's start out talking a little bit about where you grew up, and then what brought you to where you are today. But I mean, you don't sound like you grew up in Cape Town, South Africa. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California.
I
am a California girl.
and
yeah, so I actually was born in Hawaii, in Honolulu, and
okay.
my father was military, so we eventually settled in Southern California when I was about 2. And so did all my elementary school, junior high, high school. There was 1 year that I was in Mississippi, but, that's the only time that I wasn't educated in California. All my degrees are from California. So my undergraduate, my master's, and my PhD are from California. So I'm California raised and educated.
And you are a PhD in what discipline?
Astronomy and astrophysics.
Man, you're definitely classing up the joint tonight.
We need a little dramatic pause there, right?
I'm in the soft sciences. They don't get the same respect. Oh, yeah, you, what are you? Oh, I'm a psychologist. They go, oh, okay, fine. But when you bring the hard science and you bring it hard, that's pretty cool.
Thanks. Well, I've been working mostly as an anthropologist for the last 16 years, and with the anthropologist. So I went from saying, "Oh, I'm an astrophysicist," to I'm an anthropologist, and yeah, people are just not as interested in me being an anthropologist. I'll tell you that. So I see that Al asked me what military base. So I was born at Hickam in Honolulu, and the base that my father ended up on is Wayne Air Force Base in San Bernardino, and then he got out of active duty.
Well, nothing wrong with that, but I guess traditionally we would have called you like a military brat, correct?
Well, it's hardly, because by the time I was 2, we were settled. Right.
Oh, really? That young?
All the movement happened before I was 2 years old. Yeah. So I always looked at those military brats with envy because they were still moving all around the world. But it's nice being raised in Southern California. It's a nice place to live. At least it was back then.
Yeah, and so after you did all of the schooling and everything.
Yes.
You talk about the fact that you started out in astrophysics and then you've gone to anthropology. What kinds of after education jobs and things like that did you do? And were they still based in Southern Cal?
No. So Yeah, I think the most interesting jobs I had was before I got my PhD. So I'd been a Peace Corps volunteer in the South Pacific and Fiji.
Mm-hmm.
So I can speak some Fijian still. So I'll say a shout out to all my Fijian friends. Nisambula, Bakadavatiko, Vanakatiko. And then I also worked for NASA at Goddard Space Flight Center for 6 months between my master's and my PhD, working on Hubble Space Telescope images that were broken. It was before they actually fixed the Hubble Space Telescope. So I was looking at galaxies, spiral galaxies, which normally spiral galaxies are considered to be older. And if you're going to find star formation, it's going to be in the spiral arms. That's why they're lit up, because they're forming stars. Mm-hmm. But in the center of some of these galaxies, stars are forming, and they're not supposed to be forming in the center of the galaxy. It should be just, quiescent. But what's happening is there's a black hole in the center, and so all this material is being sucked in to the black hole. And as the material is being sucked in, it's compressing and making new stars. So you have a star formation center as it's falling into the center of a galaxy, which is falling into a black hole. So I was studying one of those galaxies called M83 when I was working for Goddard. Mm-hmm. And after I graduated, I pretty much worked as an academic. So I did a postdoc. I guess it was interesting. I did a postdoc in Germany at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. That was interesting. And I was a postdoc at UCLA, and I was a postdoc at Colgate University in the middle of Hamilton, New York. It's like, what were you doing in Colgate? Like, of all the places. There's a small town there. A small college there where the expert on archaeoastronomy is a professor, Anthony Avini. And so I went there to learn how to do archaeoastronomy, which means to go into archaeological sites and do measurements to see if they have aligned their buildings to celestial bodies rising and setting. So I did that, and I realized that that's not the kind of work that I wanted to do. So I liked more of the face-to-face interaction with people in order to learn about their indigenous star knowledge or their current star knowledge. And so that's why I started to go more into anthropology and less into archaeology.
And excuse me, and about how long ago was that?
16 years ago.
Okay, so you've been doing this a pretty good. No, you've been doing this a pretty good long time, and so what brought you to South Africa?
So South Africa is actually a hotbed of astronomy growth right now. I had been to South Africa a couple of times before because one of my colleagues who also does cultural astronomy is here, Tebe Mindupe. And he was doing a lot on indigenous African astronomy. So we were collaborators, so I would come down every now and then. But while I was here, I wrote a book about how they're educating the people here in astronomy and astrophysics and how that program was going, because the programs in the United States are not doing so well at diversifying astrophysics. Mm-hmm. So the program here was also to diversify astrophysics, but they were more successful. So I studied them, did a lot of interviews, and I wrote a book about them. And when a job came up actually for my husband, and it was a very, very good job. So we came back. That's kind of the long and the short of it.
No. Well, a question that occurs to me, and excuse everybody for asking, but one of the things that I'm curious about right off the bat is the relative time frames between European cultures and African cultures in their I guess their astronomical or you can't call it like astrophysics, but in their roots of astronomy. I mean, excuse me, are you talking comparable time frames in terms of, we all know about Stonehenge, we know about Druids, we know about those sorts of things, because they have been in our common culture, but we don't know very much about the kinds of astronomy and the dates and the timing of astronomical scientific endeavor in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So what kinds of things have you found that would give us kind of like a timeline of discovery, a timeline of basic interest?
Right. So with, I just have to say one thing. There's only one Stonehenge. Right. So a lot of people are looking, they go from continent to continent looking for something that's like Stonehenge. There's not. Right. There's only one Stonehenge. And right. So the kind of astronomy that everybody else was doing, you find also in Africa, mm-hmm. which is you have to set up a calendar. There's always a struggle about calendars, right? Because we want the heavens to be a clock, but they're not a very good clock. They don't really sync up nicely. And so there was always a struggle between the time that you can measure by the moon and the time that you measure by the sun. And which one is more important? Well, the sun is if you're going to be planting and harvesting. And actually there's a third calendar, and that's women's bodies, right? Women's bodies have a regular, almost lunar cycle. Mm-hmm. And so they're always trying to sync these things up. And there's a lot of mathematics and observations of the sky observed, that are part of just setting up a good calendar. Another thing is they use the stars for navigation. So my first book that I wrote was about modern day navigation by the stars and how some people are still using the stars for navigation, including the military, the U.S. military. So as for putting dates on things, I work with people who are alive, and I work with archives that go back probably about only 200 years. So I'm not in the really contentious part of the discipline where it's who did what first, right? Sure. I'm more interested in what's been going on the last 200 years. And that's entirely intentional, that, because I'm not much of a fighter. And when you enter into a new discipline, it takes a while to get up to speed. And mm-hmm. covering a 200-year period is a lot of work. And for all of Africa, Africa's 54 nations plus, depends on how you count. So I'm busy. I stay busy.
Well, okay, so I mean, it's fascinating, because essentially what you're doing is you're looking at cultures in terms of their examination of science, their manipulation of science, which is pretty cool. I mean, look at how much interest the southern cultures of the North American continent. You've got, what do you have? Mayan, you have Incan, you have, and they were very calendar oriented, or at least that's, we had stupid people who said, well, because the Mayan calendar kind of gave out at the year 2012, all of a sudden you have these end times people going, well, then that's when time is going to run out, and all these sorts of things are happening, and they forgot to realize that essentially the reason why they didn't make any new calendars is because when the Spanish come and kill everybody, nobody's going to make any new calendars. I mean, that was kind of a basic thing that I thought they overlooked, but that's just me.
Well, it was, and it wasn't the end of their calendar. It was the end of their long count. It was just the end of the way that they counted, and it rolled over. Right. It just started over again.
Yeah, but you can't convince stupid people of things like that, because they're going to ascribe all kinds of things, and that's one of the reasons why science is such a cool discipline, because it's empirical, and it's not prone to a lot of superstitious and mumbo jumbo. Although, when you talk about how people are looking for physical alignments, let's say in biorhythms and things like that, people have been ascribing metaphysical reasoning behind scientific fact for a long, long time.
Right, and I would, William.
Yes.
We're going into deep waters here, but I also, and part of my journey out of astrophysics, I spent quite a bit of time in science and technology studies, and and part of that is the history and philosophy of science. And when you get into the philosophy of science, then you see the way that people formulate scientific questions is not immune to all the personality and all the belief system, including the weird ones and the racist ones. And scientists would like to think that they're being objective, but in fact, it's a different kind of subjectivity because there's certain questions that they will not ask. And one of the things that is science's weakness is that they tend to ask only questions that they can answer, right? So they don't take on questions that they can't answer. And that has a whole host of reasons, including funding. So, science is probably the best way that we have right now for acquiring knowledge that will withstand the test of time. But to say that it's unbiased and free of superstition, I think that's, there's some fuzzy areas there.
Well, but that's true. And I may offend people, and I don't mean to offend them, but I'd like to make them think. But, we've got 15,000 years in terms of essentially organized religion where people have been fighting, insulting, and killing over essentially who has the best imaginary friend. Because
William, did you have to go there?
Well, it plays right into things that you're talking about, and I'm just trying to keep things rolling. But to get back to exactly what you're doing now, from an anthropological perspective, what are some of the more exciting things that you're dealing with in your day-to-day work?
Wow, what are the exciting things that I'm dealing with? I'm really banging my head against this paper that I've been working on universal myths. And particularly we're looking at origin myths that mention celestial bodies.
Okay.
And we're trying to I'm trying to use a new technique called structuralism developed by Levi Strauss. So it's an old technique, but it's new to me because I'm not trained in it. So I have a co-author on this paper, and I know that that Jarvis is back in school. I feel like I'm back in school because I'm analyzing and I'm putting out text and I'm sending it to my co-author, and my co-author's like, Jarita, no. No, this is not the way you should be doing that. And so it's like, I'm really back and struggling with it. And so just as I was talking about calendars, there's some evidence that most of the myths, the origin myths that we have passed down, are really myths about time, about the destruction of time, the creation of time, and the harnessing of time. And so the harnessing of time is learning the regular cycles of time for life here on Earth. And so we've looked at something like 15 myths, and it seems to hold. And also, we're not the only ones. Levi Strauss also said the same thing, that most myths are myths about time and harnessing time. So,
and just so everybody knows, we're not talking about the blue jeans guy. Not that Levi Strauss.
No, we're talking about the anthropologist.
Exactly. Well, unfortunately, not all of us are as well versed with the players as you are. But I also think it's kind of cool that moving, for you to go from one discipline to another, and like you said, it is very, very much like going back to school again and starting over. But to pick or to choose to do that is, I don't want to say it's like brave, but it's pretty, well, I guess it's a pretty cool thing for someone to decide to do that. And you did that mostly because of the fact that your enjoyment of research is humanistically based, and you like working with the recent people, with recent myth, or with actual people, or I mean, where's the greater satisfaction for that for you?
Well, graduate school is not easy, but one thing that it does make you realize is it makes you realize what you want to do with the rest of your life and what you don't want to do with the rest of your life.
Right.
And I was a rather older graduate student as well. I had, like I said, I worked for NASA and I'd been in the Peace Corps. And so I realized that I wanted to do more. If you can believe it, I wanted to do more with my life than just astrophysics.
Mm-hmm.
I know it sounds ridiculous, but that's just the way that it was. And you have to really look at the lifestyle. So when I was a graduate student, I got repetitive stress in one shoulder. And
from
working on the computer with a mouse.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
Right? So in astrophysics, my life was sitting in front of a computer. And that was broken up by going to the telescope every now and then. And I actually quite enjoyed observing. But I was 12 plus hours a day sitting in front of a computer. And when I moved into the social sciences, so I first moved to a history department at UCLA, I went to get my eyes checked. And my doctor said, "How many hours are you spending a day in front of the computer?" And I said, 6. And she's like, "Oh, that's too much." And I thought, "Ooh, I better not tell her how much I used to." So I just, it was, and, I needed to find my people, and I needed to find a profession in which I got more satisfaction day to day out of what I was doing. And I was excited about what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And I felt like my skills, what I wanted to be doing, matched better what I'm doing now, which is the field is actually called cultural astronomy. And you know that I am actually in a physics department here in South Africa. I'm at the University of the Western Cape in the physics department. So even though I say I'm a social scientist, I'm back in the physical sciences. So I'm the social scientist with the PhDs in the physical sciences in a physical science department. So it's quite confusing to everyone except for me, right? I never get confused about myself, but I don't really expect other people to be able to keep up with all these posturings. So moving from field to field, it takes, people say that I'm brave and courageous and all of that. And I just say, something, I'm just middle class, right? So I could do what I wanted. If you're poor, you've got to work, right? If you're not poor, you can have your exploration. I mean, how many poor families send 2 kids off to the Peace Corps? Peace Corps is volunteer work. Who can afford to spend 2 years volunteering in another country? Both me and my sister did it, right? So it's very middle class sort of things. And so I and also when you're middle class or even upper middle class, your whole perception of the world is different because, the need to worry about your next meal is gone. And so that lack of dependence on other people for jobs or everything, that tension is not as great. You don't perceive the world as being against you because you don't really need them all that much, right? You need them, but it's not dire. So you can afford. You can certainly be more.
Sure, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying that if you're not starving, you can be more adventurous.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at social change in this country, and we look at a lot of pushers, and not pushers, but a lot of movers of social change, let's talk, civil rights, the Vietnam War, and things like that. Middle-class people were at the forefront of a lot of that because, as you said, they were not having to struggle every day for survival. And that does give you a little bit of freedom in order to push those things forward and to be committed So, I mean, that makes perfect sense. So, all right, so that's the hard science part of you, in terms of your kind of your, I guess, your employment or whatever. There is a more creative side, or a creative side to you, and that is your writing. Well, do you want to talk about your writing first, or do you want to talk about? I'm interested about the documentary that you worked on. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, let's talk about the documentary. Yes. So I'm actually in the middle of making two documentaries. One is the Micro X project, which is not finished yet. And the other is Black Sun, which is the one that, has all the bells and whistles and the sparkles and the lights going off around it right now. But I have to also say that my other documentary, Hubble's Diverse Universe, just won its first prize. So now I'm a prize-winning documentary filmmaker. Woohoo! So it was submitted to the Capital City Black Film Festival in Austin, Texas, and it picked up third place for Best Documentary Short. So I'm very proud of that.
How cool is that? Is that available for people to see online yet?
No, it's not. But this is the last year that it's in festival. So I'm hoping to make it available more broadly sometime next year. And those of you who supported me for my Kickstarter campaign for Black Sun got DVD copies of Hubble's Diverse Universe as a thank you gift. So thank all you people.
Well, first of all, congratulations. And second of all, I would like to remind people, please, no bootlegging. Thank you very much.
It's, if we ever do sell it, it's only going to be, I mean, when I go and do lectures and stuff, I take copies of Hubble's Diverse Universe and I sell copies, and at most it's $20, and sometimes it's only $10, depending on the audience, right? So it's so cheap. Why would somebody bootleg something that's so cheap? And all the money goes to my future films like Black Sun, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, then that's a good question too. Next year, I mean, do you anticipate coming back to the States and doing, kind of like a tour about the documentary where people can get to see you, question you, see the documentary and things like that? Is that something that's on your plate coming up?
It all depends on how much money we raise for the film, because we're not finished with Black Sun. We're in post-production. So we need to raise about $25,000 to finish the film. And we need to raise about $200,000 to really do a fantastic job finishing this film. For example, I want to do some animations to illustrate some of the scientific concepts that are in the film. Right
Sure.
Now, what we have, am I speaking too fast?
No.
So right now what we have is we have our scientists talking about various physical concepts, and we have some of their visuals. But it would be so much nicer to actually have animations that are made for the film that we can show, that can be a cutaway. So while the scientist is talking, you have this animation going, illustrating what he says better than we can show with just another NASA image, right? So we would like to do that, and that costs some money. So things like that, just to make it more accessible, because when you're talking, everyone thinks the sun is pretty simple. So we're just jumping into the technicalities without giving the overview of what the film is about. So let me back up. And Black Sun is my latest documentary film project. There are two African American men who are solar astrophysicists. One is Hakeem Oluseyi, and the other is Alphonse Sterling. So Alphonse Sterling, I'd say, is the quintessential nerd, and I've said it to his face, so he's okay with it. And we were both undergraduates at California Institute of Technology. So if you don't earn a nerd badge by getting a Caltech degree, I don't know what, right? So he fully acknowledges his nerdom. And so he lives and works in Tokyo, Japan. He is the NASA liaison for the Honoda satellite. And there's many parts of our documentary film around Alphonse that are just stunning. It's like, I'm used to him. I'm like, oh yeah, this is Alphonse, and part of this is my academic family, right? Alphonse and Hakeem are like my brothers. So it's like my brother Alphonse, who lives in Japan. So we have images of him speaking Japanese on his cell phone. And I thought, Black audiences are going to lose their minds when they see this brother speaking Japanese on his cell phone, because he's lived in Japan for 20 some odd years. And even when he was an undergraduate at Caltech, he was studying Japanese. So, it's just, I know you're part Japanese, aren't you, William?
Yes. I like to tell people it's the upper half and the lower half of me is Black. But yes, but the whole culture shock thing, I understand very well. I actually went to a comedy show where there was a Japanese comedian who had grown up in Texas, and he had that accent, and my head almost exploded because the juxtaposition of the two cultural imperatives, it weirded me out. But I think that would be very cool. And the cool thing about that is we are multicultural, in ways that are unexpected. They're just unexpected, and that's a cool thing. I mean, up until 2009, nobody had ever seen a Black president of the United States before, and yet now we have that image for. I mean, there are kids now who are being raised who don't know a white or excuse me, a full white president of the United States instead of just a half white one who looks Black. Well, no, those breaking down those barriers is just as important as anything else, because it also lends people the idea that, no matter who or what you are, there should be nothing that should be beyond your grasp. So or beyond your reach. So I think it's cool. I mean, anytime I can see a brother speaking Japanese, it would take me a year to get all mine back because my grandparents didn't speak English at all. But he sounds like a pretty remarkable guy and a great guy to have that kind of scientific relationship with.
Right. So the other subject is Hakeem Oluseyi, and I actually showed clips of him. He's also in Hubble's Diverse Universe, whereas Alphonse is not. And I showed a clip of Hakeem to some of my colleagues in Africana studies. It was at a conference. And one of them came up and said, wow, that brother Hakeem, he's like a big old thug. Whoever thought that he'd be an astrophysicist? So Hakeem is sort of the opposite of Alphonse. He's loud, he's obviously deep voiced, African American man. And he was raised in the worst neighborhoods all across the United States. So the contrast, and they're friends. The thing is, they're friends, they're colleagues. Like I said, we're like an academic family. And the contrast of those two working together is just precious. I just love getting them both on screen. So what the heck were we doing? So those are the personalities, and I'm the third personality in the film. I'm somewhere in between being a thug and being super nerdy. So I'm the moderator between them. At least I'd like to think that I'm in the middle. But what happened was last year there were 2 solar eclipses, an annular eclipse and a total solar eclipse. One was in May in Tokyo, and the other was in Cairns, Australia in November. And we filmed Hakeem and Alphonse working those eclipses because they're doing scientific observations of the lower atmosphere of the sun. And the lower atmosphere is most visible during total solar eclipses. So that's, we have the play on words black sun, because during an eclipse the sun turns black because the moon is in front of it, and black sun because we're following 2 African American men who are solar astrophysics doing scientific observations during total solar eclipses.
And when do you think, well, I mean, let's assume that money becomes less and less of a problem. What would you look at for
You mean
a
somebody just
completion
writes
date?
me a check?
Well, I'm working on it. I'm thinking about it. You know, I got a couple nickels saved up. We'll talk later. But I mean, seriously, do you have
Thank you, William.
do you have a timetable? If I had 2 nickels to rub together, I wouldn't be doing this show. Anyway, do you have?
I knew that you were not serious. But go ahead.
Well, you never know. If I win the lottery, I'll tell you what. I'll toss you whatever you need. But I mean, how long do you think you're looking at for the development of this project? If you can get the animation, if you can kind of,
yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes. If we had our budget, we'd be wrapped in 2 months. Honestly, we're just going slow because we're getting small donations and we're putting our money together and we're paying for this. And then, you know, we get that done and we have to start nickeling and diming again to get the next little bit of money to do the next part. So if we had the budget that we wanted, we could be done and wrapped in 2 months. And we're not doing too badly, considering that we don't have our full budget. Right now, we were hoping to be done by June, and we had a draft that was not the best cut of the film. It's not the final cut of the film, but it was enough to send it to Gabon for the total solar eclipse that happened on the 4th of November, 3rd and 4th of November, depending on where you were. So we had something that was ready for them, but what was ready for them did not include like the soundtrack and no animations, and it was not, the sound quality of the film itself hadn't been polished or color matched. So it was probably as close to a roughest cut as you could send. But our logic was that it was going to be dubbed into French. So since it was going to be dubbed into French, the sound quality wasn't so important because people would be reading the subtitles. They wouldn't be listening to what people were saying. And
right.
I haven't gotten any feedback on that screening yet, but, you know, the person who screened it thanked me and all that. So there's a question here about Kickstarter. Yes, we kickstarted the project was started with a Kickstarter. So the major pots of money that we raised were the Kickstarter fund, which got us to Tokyo, and a small National Science Foundation grant, which paid for us to go to Cairns. So we got the filming done. We have our footage, but making a film is all post-production, you know, and it's hard to convey that to all my astronomer buddies out there that in some ways getting the film was the easy part. It's what you do with it that's so important, that can make and break the film. You have to edit and re-edit and then edit with music and then play it to audiences. You can just throw something together and put it out there. But if you want a quality product, it's a lot of time in the post-production phase. And especially since we're trying to convey such difficult astronomical concepts at the same time. Those have to be pitched just right. We don't want to put people to sleep in the middle of a description of, you know, this is what the solar atmosphere looks like, and these are magnetic field lines.
Right, and not only that, but the other thing about post-production is if you execute something very, very well, it makes it a lot easier for you to do the next one and then the next one and then the next one.
That's right.
And it sounds very much like this is not anywhere near, your end product where you're just going to stop. I mean, your science is going to march on, your interest marches on, and it appears that you have a very, very strong family of supporters and scientists. So, excuse me, essentially, this is just the very beginning of something that can become pretty substantial in terms of your output over time. And
that's right. And I already have plans for my next film.
Okay.
You want to hear
Anything you
about
want to
that
tell
concept?
us? Yes, absolutely. I'd love to.
So as I choose my documentary films, they get harder and harder to fund because I go deeper and deeper into African American culture. So Hubble's Diverse Universe was African Americans and Hispanic Americans. So it was more of the diversity and astronomy sort of thing. Black Sun is much more African American, right? So there's no main character in the film who's not African American. So that's harder to fund, right? So it's showing diversity in scientists, but it's really focusing. It's a study of African American culture within astrophysics in some ways.
That's two whammies. That's kind of 2 8 balls you've put yourself behind, because, the science education, at least in the States, has been declining for quite some time now. And then, when you talk about putting together, a project where the main characters are African American, if George Lucas has to self-fund Red Tails,
I know. Thank you, George Lucas. Thank you, George Lucas. Yes, I still enjoyed that film. It was great.
Yeah, but I mean, you've made yourself an uphill climb, and that's not to say that you've done yourself wrong, but it appears that you obviously know the kind of pitfalls that you're going to face in trying to get these projects funded.
Yes. So the project that I have in mind for the next step in study of African American astrophysicists, there's 3 astrophysicists who came from basically the projects and became astrophysics. Of course, Hakeem is one of those, but there's 2 others, Dietrich Foster, and who just got his PhD last month and is now a postdoc in Paris. So we're going to have that brother speaking French, pretty soon. I speak French too. And then there's another one, Reva K. Williams, who's at University of Toledo in Toledo, Ohio. And I actually haven't asked her. I think I mentioned that I would love to have her in one of my films. But so the 3 of them are very interesting because they come from very difficult circumstances. They have very not upper middle class roots. And in general, astronomy is a very upper class and upper middle class profession. So it's very hard to find astronomers who parents or grandparents don't have degrees, right? Or were not professionals. I know that there was one guy that was a professor at University of Arizona, Mike Mayer, who his parents didn't have degrees, but his grandparents did. But it's just rare. And there's a few, but it's very, very rare. So for them to make it, and of course they're playing on the middle class bias as well, because the whole idea, of somebody who speaks English with an African American accent being a scientist and being intelligent really plays with Americans' heads, right? And they're not the only ones who have to struggle in astrophysics. Southerners do as well, because there's a bias against Southerners. The Southern accent, people assume that Southerners are unintelligent, which is really unfair, right? So it's not just African Americans who have a working class or lower class African American accent who have to struggle to be taken seriously as scientists. Now, while I'm here in South Africa, there's the latest and greatest radio astronomy project is coming online, the Square Kilometer Array, and a lot of it's going to be situated here in South Africa. But it's in a location called the Karoo, which is this desertous region. And there's always contention between observatories and the people that live near observatories. So in the United States, a lot of observatories are sitting on Native American land. And what happens between the people and the observatory is usually, it's not really a good relationship. So I'm studying some of the same themes that I was exploring in the United States here in South Africa, and I'm going to make a film about that. I'm waiting to hear about funding for that, but funding from that would come from, funding sources here in South Africa. And since in some ways it will be promoting the fact that South Africa is becoming such a powerhouse in astrophysics, I think that it will get funded. That film will get funded.
Well, we'll definitely keep our fingers crossed on that. Actually, I was going to mention that all of those kinds of large arrays here in America they're all on Native American lands. It's just that we took it from them.
You're right. So they either acknowledge it or they don't acknowledge it, but yes, it's Native American land. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only thing they acknowledge Native Americans having, supremacy over right now are casinos, and that's pretty racist as well. But I mean, people use racism, I would imagine, there just as much as here to divide other people, divide people from each other. You're in Cape Town, and traditionally there are all kinds of horror stories about the apartheid times and things like that. What is the racial landscape like for in the area? You're right there with boots on the ground, so to speak.
That is, I'm telling you, William, that one, first of all, I've only lived here for about a year. And to say that I understand race relations in South Africa after a year, I am not that arrogant.
Sure.
I am not that arrogant. Race relations are complicated. They have historical roots that I don't understand. But I think there's a fact that American audiences might find really interesting about South Africa in terms of apartheid. And that is, apartheid was set up only about 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. So it was post-World War II. But even though I say that apartheid was set up 50 years ago, something very much like apartheid existed before then, right? Because it was a colony and it was, white people in charge, and anyone brown was not in charge, and they were, relegated to the servant class or the working class or the business class, but they weren't allowed to fulfill their potentials in the ways that they wanted to. So I think that that's interesting that it's, apartheid was not that old. You would think it had been in place forever, but legally it had only been in place for about 50 years.
And, so does that affect still, like the scientific landscape in terms of,
Yes.
That's what I thought. And so what I'm trying to ease into that so that, but from your perspective, because you are a newcomer and you do have the perspective of being an outsider looking in,
yes.
What do you see as kind of the landscape, and where are the cultural differences that, in terms of scientific endeavor, in terms of access to education, in terms of even class distinctions between the races, in terms of, here, like you said, here, if somebody from Texas is coming up to the University of Chicago to lecture, I'm automatically going to have a built-in bias thinking that because of that accent, this guy ain't nothing but a redneck, and why am I even listening to him? And that's, that's kind of like American culture. I'm wondering how much of that kind of residual is still prevalent where you are from an outsider's view.
Right. So the redneck culture equivalent is the Afrikaans, the white Afrikaans speakers, and they're trying to disconnect. Not all of them. There's always a holdout, but they're also trying to disconnect their accent and their culture from notions of them being inherently racist, right? That just because you're an Afrikaner does not mean you're a racist. Because it was not true during apartheid, not all Afrikaners were racist. But a lot of the resistance and when you think of resistance, who was resisting apartheid and who was fighting against apartheid that were white, people associate that with the English-speaking white South Africans and not the Afrikaners. And so they're kind of have sort of at least in my mind, that same struggle as Southerners in the United States. Not all Southerners are racist, but we still associate that Southern access with being racist, right?
That is true, yes. Well, I mean, it's very hard to get away from stereotypes because a lot of them exist. Obviously, the basis for stereotypes, there's truth in that, and of course, as you said, not all whites in South Africa were racist, but the caveat to that is, well, they may not have been, but they benefited from. And so, I mean, it's kind of tough. It sounds to me like you're at least one step removed from that, because what you're looking at is scientific endeavor as being kind of like the basis for what you're working on, and hopefully the rest of that is not impacting much of what you do. Would that be fair to say?
It would be fair to say if I understood exactly what you were trying to say.
Well,
well, okay.
Well, here, I've got this question. Here,
wait a second. It's 5 a.m. here. Did I miss something that William was trying to put across there?
No, sometimes I don't know what I'm saying.
Okay, so the strangest thing, remember I wrote a book about astronomy, essentially astronomy culture, as found in a particular program here in South Africa. And I think that the strangest thing is that it's not South African culture. It's Euro-American culture that's here.
That's what I was going to ask you.
Yes, so most of the astronomers are not South African. They're trying to increase the number of South African astronomers and astrophysicists, but right now the culture is Euro-American. So that's probably the strangest thing. But once you realize that everybody there is a foreigner, then it starts to make sense, right? But I would like to see what astronomy and astrophysics culture is like done South African style, right? I would like to see that. So I have made the bold suggestion that because a lot of astrophysics work is done collaboratively, that we should say that we're doing Ubuntu, right? We do astronomy Ubuntu style, which means, we're doing it collaboratively. And they're like, but it's not quite Ubuntu. And I'm like, yes, but can we make it Ubuntu? And so it's kind of a fun discussion that we're having, but it's even hard for South Africans in astrophysics to conceive of what a South African style of astrophysics would look like.
Okay, I get that. Hang on a second. You're listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. This is the November 15th, 2013 edition, which coincidentally is the 1-year anniversary of the beginning of this show. I can't believe that much time has gone by. It seems kind of amazing. And tonight's
That's right.
special
You've
guest.
been hosting all these shows. You've been the main host for all of these shows. So you have to pat yourself on the back.
Well, it helps that I can't leave the house because of the ankle bracelet, so it gives me something to do on Friday night while everybody else is out at the club.
Oh,
so
William, stop.
but I mean, seriously,
That's
I mean that in itself is a pretty cool accomplishment to have this thing going for that long. I don't know of any other comparable show about Black creatives or about Black culture that's been, doing this kind of talk. But like I said, I don't get out much. Our special guest tonight is Dr. Jarita Holbrook. She is coming to us from South Africa, this is amazing technology. That you could be in Cape Town. Jarvis is doing all the board work in Tennessee, and I'm hosting from Chicago. And I think that that in itself is just amazing. I'm
really glad that we can actually say that this time, considering all the technology failures we had a year ago with me trying to be the guest a year ago.
Yeah, but that was just the man. That was just the man.
It's saying that I've learned what I can do and what I can't do from South Africa in terms of digital stuff. So,
well,
and
I'm
we
just going to
say a shout out to Google Voice, because that's how we're doing it tonight. I'm calling in using my Google Voice account. So yay, Google Voice.
Oh, now that is cool. So we've got Google Voice going into TalkShoe, and I've dialed in from my cell phone, and I mean it is, the technology is amazing, and all credit to that. I think that last time, and this is my story and I'm sticking to it, one of the reasons why we had so much trouble a year ago was it was just the man trying to keep us down. Okay, so that's my story and I'm sticking to it. All right, so now, we're about halfway done with the show. Let's get to your creative side, because you're writing, you're doing a number of things. You're working on a short story right now. I've read your work. I like your work. I think that a lot of it is evocative of even some of the culture, the roots of African culture, in that you are telling stories that have that kind of, well, you know what? You describe it. Why don't you talk about, when did you first start, as a gearhead scientist? When did you decide to kind of move over and start writing creatively? What was the impetus for that?
There was a short story that came to me way back. Good grief! Oh, it was a while ago. There's always these lectures on physics education and how to teach physics better. And so little things like, I can make a little animation or a short story that could teach that to kids, and they would never forget that concept again. And so that was probably 15, 14 years ago that I started having thoughts like that. But what happened was in 2009 was the International Year of Astronomy. And I was head of the United States group on cultural astronomy and storytelling. So it was an international effort from the United Nations, but I was head of one of the U.S. groups. And during that time, I was traveling a lot. I traveled every month, and I went to Russia. And I, of course, of all the things that I imagined myself doing in my life, it's like, I'm going to definitely go to like Nepal and to, there's sort of this bucket list of places that I want to go to. And Russia was not on it. So I had never, because all while I was growing up, diplomatic relations with Russia were you weren't allowed to go unless you had very, very special permission. So here I was in a place that I never imagined that I would be. And what happens when you go to another country where you don't speak the language is everything gets really quiet, because there's a whole level of verbal input that you're not getting because you don't speak the language, and it's quite peaceful. And you actually, for me, I get a lot of work done when I leave the country and go into a place where I don't speak the language. It's like, oh, okay, and it kind of frees you up. And so the story that's the basis of Astronaut Tribe had been brewing, in the back of my head. And in Russia, I actually started to put pen to paper and just start constructing the story. And we've talked before that my stories are built around the climax, right? What happens is the climax comes to me first, and then I build a story around the climax. And since, Astronaut Tribe, it's four books, and I'm in the middle of, because it's the National November Write a Novel Month, I'm at almost 30,000 words of the final book of Astronaut Tribe. And the premise behind Astronaut Tribe, and I'll just say it because, once it's published, everyone's going to know what the premise is anyway. The premise is that human beings are actually genetically encoded to survive in space without a spacesuit. So when you put them out in space, their body sort of does its thing and protects them from dying in a vacuum. So that's the core of the whole Astronaut Tribe series. Now, what does that mean? When that's what your main concept is, what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that at some point you have to get somebody out in a vacuum, right? What are the circumstances in which someone is going to essentially be thrown out into space, right? And so that's
usually it's an accident. Yeah, usually it's an accident that foments that kind of situation.
But not without a spacesuit.
Right.
Not without a spacesuit. So that's the purpose. So that's sort of the core. So I was writing today, and in the first book, in Astronaut Tribe, the first book, they go on a 3-year mission. And in the last book, it's a one-way mission to the next star. And building a spaceship for 3 years is significantly different from building a spaceship for maybe 40 or 50 years. And thinking through this, and I really made my daughters laugh, it's all about human excrement.
Yes, it is.
So everything else is recyclable. But basically, you're going to be up to your eyeballs and human excrement after a while, unless you figure out what to do with it. So I spent hours tonight thinking about, well, what am I going to do with all this human waste? Because, everything else is recyclable. You can recycle water, but the whole thing is you have to have a closed system where nothing can be lost, because, every drop of water, if you're on a long-term voyage, every drop of water is important. Every molecule of oxygen is important. Especially for the ship that I designed, the gravity system is what I call a sticky air system. And the idea is that you have, there's inert gases that are heavy, but still gas. And so if you can make a pressurized system where the heavier gases are at the top and the lighter gases are at the bottom, then you have a downward pressure. And so in order to get that gradient of heavier molecules at the top and lighter ones, or heavier elements at the top and lighter ones at the bottom, the one molecule which is slightly charged is water molecules. And you can actually get them to align in the way you want with a mild electronic field. And so that's the sticky air system. And what's different about my ship from other ships, because it's a sticky air system, it's more humid. If you think about the inside of spaceships, you think it's dry as a bone. But in my ships, it's actually humid because they use a sticky air system. So every drop of water is important for humans, for plants, and for their artificial gravity system. So, but I figured it out. I put my head to the task for a good solid hour, and I decided that, and this was inspired, I was at the Race in Space conference at Duke University 2 weeks ago, and Mae Jemison was there, and she gave a lecture, and she has the 1,000-year space project. I'm sure I'm citing that wrong, but it is a think tank for getting us ready for space. And within 100 years, they want us to be in space and colonizing space and doing long-term voyages or living on Mars or living on the moon, et cetera. And so they have to think through some of these issues. And she gave us a story about how she gave a lecture in one situation where there were different kinds of people other than nerdy scientists who were Star Trek geeks. And one of the people in the audience said, "Can you sew?" And she said, "No, I can't sew." And he says, "Well, you can't even go on the ship, because if you don't know how to sew, then you're not useful, because everybody on a ship is going to have to sew because they have to repair their own clothing. And if you can't repair your own clothing, you're going to be walking around naked." So that got me thinking about human waste and clothing. And I'm like, well, we know that you can take human waste and turn it into paper. So on my ship, we're going to figure out how to turn it into fabric. So if you could take human waste and turn it into fabric, then as old fabric, wears out, you have a source of new fabric. And yes, you'll be wearing human excrement, and hopefully it won't smell. But if you can turn it into fabric, it would be recycled. And fabric is definitely easier to pack and fold and everything than is piles and piles of human waste. So that was my solution. Let's make fabric out of the human waste.
Well, first of all, what that is a hard science exercise. And as a writer, what you did was you took a realistic, a very real situation, a very real problem, and what you did was in order to put your story together, you put together the hard science, a plausible hard science solution to a very troublesome problem. And people, this is, Isaac Asimov. Well, I'll find the quote, but this is the essence of putting together great speculative universes, because in order to kind of give the engineers the imagination to solve these problems, we have to put out these kinds of ideas in order for them to look at. I don't know who the first person who thought of doing, growing crops hydroponically, but what did they have? Well, they had the example of underwater plants. So it just seems it seems that your story is what we would call hard science fiction, and it sounds like the basis of it is very good. Now, I've read the first installment, and I really liked it. And I don't want, I'm very careful. I don't want to tell everybody what it is, but your perspective is based in realism, and it's something that I think is going to have a great audience. That quote by Isaac Asimov was, and this is one of the reasons why I write. I read this and I thought, how cool is that? He said that individual science fiction stories may seem as trivial as ever to the blinder critics and philosophers of today. but the core of science fiction, its essence, has become crucial to our salvation if we are to be saved at all. And you take a look at what's going on Earth. We've lost 80% of the biomass in the oceans just in the last 100 years, actually shorter than 100 years. And when you think about what we're talking about, that's fish, that's, plants, that's all of that biodiversity that used to be in the ocean, 80% of it is gone. So what does that mean? That means that that's not available for use at all. I mean, we can't even
as we move forward, yes. We don't know what we lost.
Right.
We could have lost anything. People like to say we could have lost the cure for cancer, right? That's the kind of thing that they say when we lose that kind of, that huge amount of biodiversity.
Well, there was a popular movie. I think it was called Medicine Man with Sean Connery and Dr. Melfi from The Sopranos. I don't remember her name.
Yeah, where they go down to the Amazon. Yeah, I remember that film.
But see, the thing is, that was another film, and that wasn't just entertainment. That was also science fiction. A lot of people didn't look at that as a science fiction movie, but more so than not, it was, because what it did was it postulated the fact that there they were in the Amazon. They're exposed to, or they have so many different. There's so much biodiversity there. Exactly what you said. What are we overlooking? Because we don't know what we're looking at, and what might we be losing, to overforestation or things of that nature. So, I mean, Asimov's quote.
What I liked about that, I'm going to jump in because it really, that movie and what happened in that movie is the joy of the kind of scientific research that I like to do. I love designing a project, going and doing the research to get to the answer, and discovering something completely different that I completely did not expect. Is those moments in my research, my hard science research, my social science research, that fulfill my soul. I'm like, this is absolutely delicious. But, what's funny is a lot of my work ends up being like that. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to study this. And it's like, whoa, who knew that over there was happening? I'm going to go and study that. And when I actually write up the papers and I tell the story about, okay, this is what I said I was going to do, and then, boom, we had to do a left turn, nobody will pass those through review. They want the standard narrative, hypothesis, testing, conclusion. I'm like, but it didn't happen that way. Don't care. They want to censor it. So even though I very, very much enjoy that my research is a lot like that I find something deeper and more interesting, I have to present it as if that was always what I was going after.
Yeah, the scientific community is just as hidebound and just as restrictive as anything, as organized religion, which I think is the biggest oxymoron out there.
Well, you lighten up on religion tonight. You're out of control on religion
I'm
tonight.
so sorry. I'm an empiricist,
and I'm going to just stop you. You need to get yourself together. So I'm going to just give a little anecdote, okay? While you get yourself together.
Please do.
So one of the things that I discovered here in South Africa when I was studying the astrophysicists here, the students are quite religious, right? They're quite religious. And their biggest issue was that, a lot of their professors who were astronomers and astrophysicists were in some ways rabidly atheists, right? And atheist, every religion, as you know, they think that they're the best and the smartest and the most clever, and the rest of you guys must be, out of your minds because you're not like us. And that's true with the atheists as well. And they present themselves as being, this is the intelligent choice, is to be an atheist. And if you're not an atheist, then you must be ignorant, backward, superstitious, or just stupid. And so it was making for a very unhappy, intense situation with the students. And so, you can't, it's another form of discrimination, right? When the atheist professors make the students feel bad because they're Christians or they're Muslims or they're whatever. So it's just another form of, it's like saying, I'm heterosexual and you're homosexual. You must be stupid. So,
or there's something wrong with you. Yes.
Yes. And so in this context, it really made me think about how religion is being played out within the physical sciences and how it can be discriminatory just like anything else. So you should be a little bit lighter on people who are religious. You have to be a little bit lighter.
I will be very honest with you. I am an ordained minister. I went through school, but I'm also an empiricist, and I won't apologize for that because the things in my world, including the writing and things like that, are based upon certain truths that are provable, certain truths that are seeable, certain truths that are not arguable. The thing that I don't like, and I said it at the beginning, we've had all of this strife and stuff.
The wars that are fought over religion.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And that's religious tolerance, right? So religious tolerance.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's missing in the South African context is religious tolerance. So it should be promoted. Everybody has to, I always say when people are like, but this is all illogical and all that stuff, you say, you don't know what it takes to get somebody out of bed in the morning, and you're not there when they have to get out of bed in the morning. So you need to leave them alone.
Well, I mean, look at you. I mean, just what you did for tonight. I mean, you got up at what, 3:30, 4 o'clock, in order to be with us. I mean, that in itself is laudable, and of course we're all grateful and very thankful that you did that. But it's more than just writing a paper. It's more than, like you said, just looking through a telescope. I mean, there's a whole lifestyle associated with devoting yourself to scientific endeavor, and the fact that not only have you devoted yourself to scientific endeavor and scientific rigor, but you've gone and you've taken a creative look at how that science affects us and how that science, the speculative universe of how that science could, bring us to the stars, bring us to other planets and things like that.
Yeah.
And that's, I mentioned Asimov. Asimov was as much a scientist as he was a writer of fiction. And so what you've done is you've done that crossover in a way that feeds both the disciplines that mean so much to you. And that's, I can't wait till people, your work gets into broader distribution, because I think it's going to be a delight. I think it's going to be an absolute delight.
Thanks. I wanted to just add, too, that one of the reasons that is given, the excuses that's given why minorities and women don't stay in the STEM disciplines is that there's lack of a social justice component to their work and lack of social relevance. So when you actually have this linkage between your research and doing something good for the world, and even if it's just telling different stories, I could have stayed in astrophysics and, just by existing, being another African-American woman in astrophysics is enough, right? That people would just be happy just to have me there, right? I wouldn't have to do much more than just breathe and be in that environment, and it would really change the way, and it has changed the way that people perceive astrophysics, that I exist and I've been able to do it. But doing films is another way of saying we're here, like Horton Hears a Who. right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we're the little. What are the name of the little people in Horton? Here's a who I guess Whoville, right?
They were.
So
Who's.
I feel like
they were.
as African Americans, we're in Whoville, right? We're the few. There's only about I think we're up to 48. There's only about 48 African American astrophysicists, right? And that's out of thousands. So where it's like, we're here. I get to do films that say, we're here, we're here, we're here. And so there's definitely a social justice component to it. But when you say that, you're studying astrophysics, and you may come up with the idea that gets us to the stars faster, that's a social good. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not necessarily astrophysicists. It may be people who are engineers and study propulsion systems that do it. You don't have to get a PhD in astrophysics. You have to know more straight physics, thermodynamics, and nuclear energy sources and things like that. So it's not quite astrophysics. But we like to think about those things as well.
Well, I mean, to go back to the person you spoke to at the conference, it might be the seamstresses who have.
Yes.
Well, I don't mean to say that as a joke, but you get what I'm saying. There are so many components to moving our civilization, to moving our people, physically outside of the envelope of Earth, that none of it and none of the people who are associated with it can be marginalized. If we, people don't realize what a cooperative effort that this, that kind of endeavor is going to take.
Yes.
Let me ask you, do you do much community outreach with kids in terms of turning them on to astrophysics and the science disciplines, the STEM types of outreach?
Well, the answer is yes, but the answer is also I turn down a lot of it as well.
Okay.
And well, first of all, my outreach has really dropped since I moved to South Africa, but it's my feeling towards astrophysics is ambivalent. So I will do it, but really I'm quite ambivalent about encouraging more students to go into astrophysics, considering the culture of astrophysics the way it is today. And the culture itself is quite exclusionary. There's a reason that there's only slightly less than 50 African Americans who have gotten a PhD in astrophysics in the history of the United States. And there's a reason why, gay men are often keep their sexuality hidden when they're an astrophysicist. There's a reason for that. It is quite exclusionary. And I think that we need, as astrophysicists, we need to work on our culture better so that it's more inclusive and does a better job dealing with diversity. And then I'll feel more comfortable doing those types of lectures. Now, as it stands, that, almost everybody has taken introductory astronomy, but, usually during their second, they're like, introductory astronomy, this is great. I want to be an astronomer. And then by the second class, they're like, I don't want to be an astronomer anymore. This kind of sucks, and it's, it's because it's an interesting situation. I don't want to air too much dirty laundry in the astrophysics community. And if you're an astronomer on this call, just give me a little ping in this chat box so I know how much trouble I'm causing. But it's and of course I have to qualify it before I say something horrible. I have to qualify it, which is astronomy is not the only discipline that has this issue. So you have the way that astronomers and astrophysicists are trained is they're trained to do research. They're not trained to teach. They're not trained to mentor. They're not trained to project manage. They're not trained in leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so basically you have teachers that haven't been trained to teach, and you have mentors that haven't learned how to mentor. And so this makes it very, and some people are naturally gifted and some people have studied these things, right? But most people have not, and they're quite clumsy at these things, and they're not the best teachers at these things either. And people are like, oh, you just have to be enthusiastic. I'm like, enthusiasm only goes so far. You actually need skills as well as enthusiasm. And so that second class is usually the class where, it's somebody who is not a good teacher and is not a good mentor. And they'd rather be doing research, and they convey to their students that they'd rather be doing something else, and that teaching is a big chore. And so it makes them, only the most determined and those with a very thick skin will continue forward from that. So in many ways, we give people a mixed message. Oh, we want diversity. We want more women. But we don't want to treat them with any decency, and we don't want to mentor them, right? And we don't want to teach them.
Right.
We want you to come already brilliant and not have to learn anything. So then I don't have to do any work. It's a very, very mixed message.
Right.
So anyway, good. Nobody said that they're an astrophysicist in the chat box.
Well, that's good. And you know what? When Neil deGrasse Tyson drops by, we're going to tell him to take all of that with a grain of salt.
Well, Neil didn't choose a teaching career, right? He chose a career in outreach.
Yeah,
so
he's very
teacher, right?
Yeah, and he's very good at what he does. He's very good at making science accessible.
He's very good.
Yeah,
so I was at a Science Meets the Media conference last week, and they actually showed a clip of Neil and how he learned to be such a good spokesperson. And he had an interview. His first interview, he said something. He was trying to explain this very difficult science concept, and he did a body motion, and that was the only thing that everybody showed. They took that body motion and they made a story around him doing this body motion. And he was like, okay, now I know that when I work with the press, I cannot use my academic voice. I have to talk in sound bites. And if you want them if you want the media to publish the things that you want to publish, you have to give it in a digestible form. And so he went home, and all he did was practice doing sound bites. So his wife would say, okay, explain black holes. And he would work until he came up with a sound bite. And it's practice. And he admits it. He learned how to do this. And he's good at it, but he learned how to do that. And he makes it look effortless, but it wasn't. It was work. And he's just awesome. So
a corollary for that for creatives, at BSFS is, to that mission for self-promotion. We talk about the elevator pitch for your creativity, for your book, for your art, for your comic, for anything like that. And that, that's a very, very important point, that when you are trying to sell yourself or your product, that you have to be able to make that the sales pitch as accessible to the people as possible. Otherwise, your message is not going to be received.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this: have you started working on that portion of how you're going to be publicizing, the Astronaut Tribe and the other works that you're going to do creatively? Is that something that you work on now, or you worry about now, or is that something that you're going to kind of put off at the beginning? Because people who are content creators also have to be cognizant of what the requirements of doing business, the business of doing business, are.
Yes. So yes, I have thought about it, because after I finished writing the first two books, the first two books I wrote in 2010 over, it was fast. The first book took a year to write, but the second one took like a month and a half, right? And so it was really fast. So I started shopping it around at that point. And with each rejection letter, I just sort of tightened and changed the things that I said, right? And so you're always learning how to pitch things better. And but you also, the thing is, as a writer, and the way that you think about presenting your work is you want to hook them, but not give the whole story away, right? Wrong. When you want them to publish your book, you give the whole story away, right? It's not about, are you interested now and read my book? No. For a publisher, you're like, here's the premise, here's the major action, here are the characters. You give them the whole thing for them to make a decision, right? So I had to learn that. But still, the series doesn't have a publisher yet. I think I mentioned on Black Science Fiction Society that there's this librarian at MIT who has read my work, and she says that she is making the transition into becoming a literary agent as well, and she would like to represent the books. So this is sort of the best case scenario, is to have somebody else, do this for you. You have a promoter do this for you. And one of the things that we were talking about early in this call is that, I've moved from astrophysics to history of science to social studies of science to anthropology. And it's like, well, do I have to really learn how to do this too? You get sort of like, okay, I'm willing to learn it, but do I have to? Can't I just hire somebody to do this for me? And the answer is yes and no. You can hire somebody to do it for you, but sometimes you have to wrangle control back into your hands if they don't do the job. And it is hard to learn when you're not used to doing this sort of selling and pitching. But that 1 minute, the 30-second, 1 minute, 2 minute pitch, we used to have to do that with our scientific research. When I was an astrophysicist, we used to have to practice that. Like I can say, and I have 2 sentences, 3 sentences that I could tell you, like each part of my career that was my, 30-second pitch. When I was studying astrophysics for my dissertation, they're like, what are you studying? I'm studying dust and ice and star formation regions, looking at the implications of composition for star formation rate and molecular clouds. That was my pitch, right? And so then when I was doing navigation by the stars, I study modern day navigation among people living today, including the United States Navy. Also my pitch. And then now, for several years when I'm in Africa, well, what do? I'm the world's expert on African indigenous astronomy. That's it. Those are the hooks. So when I'm trying to do Astronaut Tribe, I haven't quite got it down because I don't know what to reveal and what not to reveal in that 1 minute. I mean, it's like, well, I'm writing there's so many elements to the story. I don't know if I guess I can just give it away, but given the audience is one of the things that happens is the radiation pattern is different, so everyone turns black, right? So, but this is an old science fiction theme among African American writers is, what happens when, you change skin color. But I've never told it from a personal point of view. So I'm from a family where my father is quite light-skinned, and my mother is quite dark-skinned, right? So normally I'm somewhat on the lightish side, people tell me. But when I go out in the sun, I go black. I go really black. So I myself have this flexible skin. I can be light, and I can be very dark. And so depending on where I am on that darkness scale, different people respond to me in different ways. So me writing a book about a change in skin color was very natural because it's been my experience my whole life, depending on how much sun I get.
Well, again, that's just taking situational things from your life and being able to use them in the context of the story. And the other part that we were talking about, the being able to do the elevator pitch, I mean, that's something that everybody is going to have to do in the service of marketing themselves unless they're lucky enough to get, a company or a person to do their marketing for them. So, I mean, people should pay attention to the fact that even in the discipline of science, the elevator pitch is still something that has value and has value in a way that you have to pay attention to. Because if you don't, if you can't sell yourself, and you can't sell yourself in a way that's useful and effective with other people, then essentially you're putting a lot of effort into a lot of speculative diaries.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So, it was quite exciting this year in terms of Astronaut Tribe because my co-director did a treatment of it for the Project Stargazer, NASA Project Stargazer. And he actually got into the finals and went to Hollywood Black Film Festival, but unfortunately the project didn't win. So, but it was really exciting. We thought, oh man, because he really wants to make Astronaut Tribe into a film.
Oh, it would be brilliant.
Yes, but it was so interesting because it's so, the way that he wrote it, and this is again teaching me about marketing, right? The treatment that he did, only the beginning matched Astronaut Tribe, the novel. What he did after the beginning was pure Hollywood, right? and he changed the story completely. And so the question is, of course, as the person who wrote the book, how do I feel about how much he changed the story? And I was like, is he going to pay me? Cool.
Well, I mean,
I feel like a poet. I feel like, you write it, you put it out there, but everybody's going to do something different with it. When you have a piece of poetry, everybody's going to read in stuff that you never intended to be in there, or they're going to miss stuff. But you just have to let it go. It's like giving birth. You just send it out into the world and let it do its thing. I don't have any attachment. If somebody picks it up for a film, I will not be the writer on the set saying you can't do that. That's not how I envisioned it. I will not be the one. I definitely would give them creative license.
Well, what a lot of people don't realize is when you sell an option to your work, whether it be a short story, a comic, or a novel, in 99 out of 100 cases, once you sell it, you're done. Nobody gives a damn what you think about it anymore, because they're essentially taking your title, and you're lucky if their work reflects your story. And that's a tough thing. I went to a networking meeting with film wannabes, people who want to be in film, and they want to write their scripts and get them sold or whatever. And one guy asked, he said, is it possible to put in your contract that, no, he didn't even ask about the contract. He says, when you sell an option to your work, to your script, can you come on the set and watch to make sure that they're doing, what you want them to do with your work? And I thought, well, no, because once it's sold, it's sold. It's when you have power as a writer, there is a slightly better likelihood that that'll happen, but not very much. All right, so now coming down the pipe, you're going to get the 4 books done, and hopefully pick up a publisher. What kind of things are you looking at, down the line for the future? Let's look 5 years ahead, maybe 10 years ahead. What do you think you're going to do? First of all, do you think you're still going to be living where you're living now? Is that kind of a long-term living situation for you, being in Cape Town?
Well, I don't know. I'm coming to the end of this year, so my contract is finishing at the end of this year, right? And I'm trying to get a contract for next year and possibly have it be a multi-year contract. So if I don't get there, I may be coming back to the States pretty quick, like February. So so that's how sort of tenuous things are right now with what's going on here in terms of me and the University of the Western Cape. Things are quite tenuous. Yet I'm pretending like I'm going to be here. I've applied for grants that are 3-year grants. I've started building my film crew for this film about the square kilometer array. I'm acting like I'm going to be here for, at least a good few years. But it really depends on me getting my next contract. So in terms of work, in terms of my academic work, I always work. I'm always going to be doing something on African indigenous astronomy. I have a conference next year that I'm organizing for here in Cape Town, whether I'm living here or not. It's July 14th through 19th, 2014. It's on African indigenous astronomy and cultural astronomy in general. It's called Astronomy, Indigenous Knowledge, and Interpretation. And so we'll be looking at all those ways in which humans relate to the night sky, with an emphasis on how you do data collection in this area. So we expect to have a lot of students and scholars from around the world. It'd be a nice excuse to come down to Cape Town. So that's something that's going on. And as for the films, the documentary films, like I said, I have 2 films that I expect to be near completion. These that are in concept right now, but I hope to be working on them or finish with them at the end of the next 5 years. And after Astronaut Tribe, I'm not sure if I'm going to take on another series after Astronaut Tribe. I'm quite enjoying, I write fantasy as well. And in fact, the piece that's being published in the Genesis 2 is Kokopelli. That piece is pure fantasy. It's not science fiction at all. And so my short stories tend to be more fantasy, and my novels tend to be more science fiction-y. But I haven't gotten another kernel of an idea for another science fiction series. I'm getting lots of ideas about fantasy these days.
Well, where do those ideas come from? For the short stories.
So, yes. So where do they come from? I pull it out of my environment and my experiences, especially if I have something that's repeated over and over again that really annoys me. It's going to go in a book somewhere. Yeah, it's going to go in a book somewhere. And I can usually build a story around it. But what I like about the format of short stories, and everybody says, if you're going to be a writer, you have to spend some time writing short stories, is it's all in the rewrite. And in terms of the Astronaut Tribe series, I've rewritten the first novel 3 times, and I'm about to rewrite it again. Right. And for me, I was playing around with voice and point of view. And now I'm like, I'm done playing around with it. This is annoying, and the problem with the way I wrote Astronaut Tribe is it's written orally. Right. So if you read Astronaut Tribe, the first novel, out loud, it's very exciting and very engaging for an oral audience, but it doesn't read well, right? It's confusing because of the point of view changes. So I'm going to use more of a standard, point of view, and I'm just going to write it as a standard. And I've already put Astronaut Tribe onto CDs, right? So you can ask me, well, it's not that easy, actually, to get the CDs to people since I live in South Africa now. But it's already a book on tape. The first and the second book are already a book on tape. And they do read well for the audience. Yes. So, but it's a book on tape because I sat down and recorded it because I have a friend who has macular degeneration. So she can't read very well. And she loved the concept. So I read them for her. And I have them, so, when other people want to hear them, I just, burn off a couple of copies and send them away.
I can show you how you can.
It's not a class book on tape, but it is a book on tape.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
I can
it's all in the rewrite. So the point is,
I can show you how to. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was going to say I can show you how to distribute those to people because obviously there's interest in your writing, and it's such a great creative endeavor that I think it deserves to be shared. I understand you wanting to change, to re-record and change things, but it still reads well, and the story, as I read it, I heard the voices,
yes,
and I think
it's very much oral. It's very much oral, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes, yeah. So, but anyway, we can discuss that. I mean, this is all like
no, that's fine.
Stuff. We can discuss this offline. Did you want me to take questions from our audience?
Well, if they've got some here, otherwise I was going to ask you to describe your family a little bit. Tell us a little bit about the people who are around you, and hopefully maybe even inspire you or at least support you in your creativity.
I have 2 wonderful daughters and an amazing husband. It sounds like a cliche, isn't it? But isn't it nice when you can say something like that? People say that kind of thing and they don't mean it. I mean it. I have a wonderful husband and I have 2 amazing daughters. And when you think about my husband's an astrophysicist as well, right? So you have 2 really dynamic parents. What happens when you have such dynamic parents? And the whole thing is like, you really have to give your kids a huge dose of their own self-esteem and give them a sense of they have a destiny. We just have to find what their role in this world is going to be, right? Because they can be completely overshadowed by such 2 strong parents. And we both, we're both very, very good at what we do. We're both internationally famous for what we do. So, things that, and then also both of us can be charismatic, right? So my husband, when we were in graduate school, took up acting, right? So he's an amazing public speaker because he's learned how to do projection and pacing, and people just like, oh my God, he's such a good, and it's kind of normal. In normal circumstances, he's rather quiet. He lets me do the bulk of the conversation and all that stuff. But when you put him in front of a microphone, it's on. Put him in front of an audience, it's like a flip switches, and he's fun and everything normally, but there's times in which it's like he's a bright light, right? And so he's just an amazing public speaker. He's really, really good. And there's and for me there's lots of footage of me doing public speaking as well. So you can see that I am a good public speaker. And people ask me, how did you become such a good public speaker? I'm like, I taught, basically going into a classroom. I was shy. But going into a classroom every day for a few years, you better learn how to deliver, right? So anyway, so this is the context of our household. You have 2, very secure, intellectual people, emotionally in love with each other, and both of us come from families of divorced parents. Right. And I come from divorced parents and divorced grandparents. Right. So we're very conscious, at least I am very conscious of the way in which we love each other in front of my kids, because I want them to have a positive, loving relationship with their spouse. We don't fight in front of them. If we're going to have an argument that's going to get serious, we do that behind closed doors, right? There is no physical violence in this household, right? It's just you want to have, and especially with girls, you want them to not think that a guy, you don't want them to think that a guy treating them bad is normal, right?
Or
so
acceptable.
we're very much conscious of that. But this is like way different from writing science fiction. I guess it's all present in my science fiction. If you think about the relationships that appear in Astronaut Tribe, they're all quite healthy, right?
Yes,
and
they
I
were.
think that that's important, because a lot of them are multiracial, even though everyone ends up being black in the end, but they're quite healthy. None of them are sort of like, the whips and chains, whatever this crazy shades of gray thing going on now. Right? None of them are like that. And also, you and I have talked about writing erotica, right? Or writing sex scenes and things like that. And we talked about the fact that
just tell everybody, why don't you?
I didn't realize that it was some big secret.
No, it's not. I mean, it isn't at all, because, I mean, one of the things that I did was, obviously there's a love scene in Discovery, and I'm, at first I approached that with trepidation, but I will admit that the research was a lot of fun. But the thing about that is, it is part of adult life. It is part of life. And I did not want to shy away from it, to be scared of it at all. And I wanted it to be authentic, so I looked at it from both perspectives. I looked at it from a male perspective, and I looked at it from a female perspective. And I tried very carefully in Discovery to write the scene in a way that I thought was not only authentic, but was compelling for both men and women to read. That was the hard part of, and I don't mean that as a joke, but that was the difficult part of putting that together. And so how does that reflect? I mean, you brought it up. How are you looking at that in terms of your writing? Right.
So, I was not going to go there, because I think that, here comes one of my daughters. Go, I'm on a conversation. Go on, sweetheart. You can say good morning. That's the little one. You can say
tell her that everybody said hi.
Everyone said hi, and no, you can't have the VPN because I have to use it for this interview right now. Okay. Thank you. So it's now 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning, and my kids don't have any technology during the week because it's school night. And so Friday night and Saturday, it's on. They want to get on Netflix. They want to watch YouTube. They want to do Minecraft, et cetera, et cetera. So
tell her you've got only about you've got less than 10 minutes to go.
Oh my God, are we at the end of the time?
Almost.
Anyway, with Astronaut Tribe, everyone thinks that, if they don't read the book, they think it's a young adult novel. And in order to change it into an adult novel, I could either add sex or add more cursing. And everyone's like, oh, don't do that. But I'm like, but then at the same time, what I just said contradicts what I said before, which is put your work out there and let it go, right? But this is annoying me. I'm like, it's an adult novel, even though it doesn't, there's sex in the novel. It's just not explicit, right? They kind of go into a room and close a door. What do you think they're doing back there? Do we have to be all up in it? But at the same time, I have friends who, they love erotica. So it's like, they would like to see a sex scene in there. I don't know. I'll just write it. And the whole thing is in scientific writing, in social science writing, when you write a book, you hand it to the press and you hand it to their lead editor. And their lead editor makes a large number of suggestions which help you to improve the book. So I figure that the same thing may happen, that when I finally do get a publisher, that they'll say, you should add a sex scene, or you should add more, something like that. And so I'm still flexible in that. And I guess I just wanted a higher authority to tell me what to do. So we'll see. So any questions from the audience?
Well, someone did ask what you think of the concept behind the term Afrofuturism. You are mentioned in Yatasha Yar's her book that just came out on Afrofuturism. And when you think of it,
in there.
Yeah, she said something about your headshot, and no, I'm just kidding.
William.
but seriously, I had Yatasha on, and one of the things that I said is I think that in terms of American culture, I think Afrofuturism is something that is getting ready to break out in a huge way. So from your perspective, when you think about the term Afrofuturism and how it's being applied to common culture now, do you what do you think in terms of what may be coming down the pipe for American or African American writing and the concept of Afrofuturism?
Well, I really, William, I really don't have much to say about that, honestly, because
we can move on.
Getting myself embedded. I'm getting myself embedded in my sort of African identity here, and one of the things I'll just riff on. This is called avoidance. It's like, well, I don't want to talk about this, but let me talk about something else, which I think you might find interesting. Is I'm a big horror fan,
right?
And since we were talking about religion, most of the horror movies that are made for Catholics or for Christians. So I'm always looking at horror films from cultures that are not Catholic or Christian because they don't involve the traditional tropes that you see over and over in horror films. So
Sure.
I've been trying my hand at writing horror films that are based in Africa. Right. And actually I've been failing, but I'm still attempting this. So I'm trying to feel like what is different about being in Africa? What are the stories and the mythologies that are circulating here that I can twist to my evil design?
Okay. And when you look at the totality and you look at all of the major movies, and I apologize. I said I misspoke about Natasha Womack's name. When you look at trying to write using different tropes like that, what are you finding major differences? I mean, what's the big difference for you that you've found so far? Since obviously you've done a little bit of research about that.
Yeah, and I need to do more research about it. But the type of the moralizing and the core truths are different as you move from culture to culture, and how they see themselves moves from culture and culture. So their image of who they are, and so therefore, what makes them afraid is something that's going to disrupt their image of themselves. And, I like to say that the most horrific thing about being, abroad is, the thought of the way that America really is versus the image of America. I have the most common, whatever people say about America, it's always something like, what are you Americans up to? You're doing this and 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 this. And the fact is that, we're a rather horrific entity. And I bring this home to people by saying, all that is true, but that's only what you know about. We're doing much worse, believe me, right? Because, America's reach is everywhere. And our involvement in other people's governments and elections and stuff is present, right? And us taking people out is real, right? But we have great PR. We have great PR. People think wonderful. And whenever something happens in another country, they think it's an anomaly. They're like, oh, the Americans were bad in this case, but they're good guys. It's like, no, that's not exactly true. So maybe one day I'll do a story about like the long reach of America, right?
Well, good luck getting that one published. I hate to do this, but we're in the. Yeah, I mean, it's been great. I mean, I want to thank everybody who tuned in. We had a ton of people tune in. Always remind your friends that they can pick up these shows as a podcast very shortly after we're done with them. This show goes on the air at 9 o'clock Eastern Time every Friday night. And, I am graced with some of the most interesting creatives that I will ever meet. And that's one of the cool things about it. And for you to wake up in the middle of the morning, very early in the morning, to do the show was just, I mean, Jarita, thank you very much for joining us. And joining us for our 1-year anniversary. It was 1 year ago this week that was the semi-official kickoff of the Genesis Science Fiction Show, which, of course, is a service of the Black Science Fiction Society.com. If you do make it to the States to do any kind of promotional tour for the documentary, for the other movie, anything else that you're going to do next year, or if you do not get the opportunity to renew the grants and you end up having to move back here, what I would like to ask you to do is to be sure to post any appearances where you might be in the U.S., so that if somebody's in the neighborhood and they want to take a look and see what you're up to and maybe meet you in person, please post your appearances in the events calendar and let people know where you are. Because, girl, I would be I'll tell you, if I could get to South Africa and not have this bracelet go off, I'd be down there to visit just to see some of the stuff that you guys do down there. But that's really a big parole violation. But seriously, think in terms of posting up on the BSFS events calendar any of your appearances, and if you do, also, please also post where they may be showing your the documentary and any of your other work.
Yeah. Sure, I'll do that. So I'm planning to be in the States. I'll be there the second week of January in the Washington, D.C. area. And I haven't bought my ticket yet. So if anybody wants to have me for a speaking engagement in that area, they need to let me know now. So I'm thinking about, I think it's the Friday, the 10th or 11th, I will have free. And I should fly back home that Saturday. So I'm trying to see who wants me to do a speech or something on that Friday in the D.C., Baltimore area.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. So that's rapidly approaching. Post up the times when you're going to be, where your appearances are, so that people can get hold of you, and hopefully they have the opportunity to see you in person. Once again, I want to thank you very much for spending the last couple of hours with me. I've had a great time. I hope it was not painful for you, other than the fact that you had to get up so early. And again, thank your family for letting you have the VPN up until now.
Thank you.
And you know what? Maybe when you're in the U.S., we might be able to do a little something. Maybe have you on briefly while you're here in the States. Make it a little bit easier technologically. So on behalf of everybody here, I want to send it over to our peerless leader, Jarvis Sheffield. What you got for us, Jarvis?
Hey, I'm going to just keep this real brief because I got to go to class in the morning myself. But I want to give 1,000 thanks out to everyone that participated. I want to thank JC for getting up early in the morning to come and be on the show with us. I want to thank everyone that shared the information about the show tonight, everyone that came on and listened. And, of course, I want to thank William for doing a great job, as always, hosting the show. I want to give thanks out to everybody. It's really appreciated.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And this has been the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the Black Science Fiction Society.com website. And don't forget, we'll be here again next week. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Good night.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Bye-bye.